Can everyone hear me okay? Great, awesome. Welcome. This is our third week of our Decode class, and then the topic that we're covering today is product market fit. So before we introduce the speakers, I'll go over logistics as usual. And then the difference is that today we're actually doing a product panel, so it's quite exciting. Logistics, camera on and mute on. And then for any questions, just send it in the chat or use the raise hand feature. And then again, we don't accommodate, for missing assignments. And then just remember, oh, that's actually a typo. But the product homework and the project assignment are due this Sunday. And then please go register and go vote. And then for any questions, email decodesv@gmail for for any help. So without further ado, today's speakers, panelists, Shaw, who was here 2 weeks ago. She did a great job. And then Clement, who is the product manager at Land, and then also founder at product manager HQ, and then also Jerry, the founder at Welcome. With that being said, let's welcome them.
Perfect. Thank you, Thomas. So hi, everyone. I'm sure most of you will remember me from the opening lecture, but I know some of you had your CS midterm exam during that first session. So I believe there is a recording from that first lecture if you guys want to catch up. But otherwise, we have a really, really exciting panel here for you guys today. This is the panel that I wish I could have listened to when I was in undergrad. What's really special is that both Jerry and Clement actually are from Cal themselves. So they are both Cal alumni. And so they'll have a lot of shared experiences as you guys and probably can share the most relevant advice. And so with that, really excited to have you both here today. Thank you for taking time out of your both busy schedules. So to start, maybe we could have both of you talk a little bit about your story of, since Cal, what's happened. So maybe, Jerry, do you want to start?
Sure, yeah, I can start. So I graduated Cal in 2005. So I feel really old talking to you guys. And after Cal, so my first job was actually in the defense industry. I actually worked for Lockheed Martin for about 6 years. And then the iPhone came out. I remember very distinctly. I watched Steve Jobs introduce the iPhone. I was like, wow, that's an amazing piece of technology. I wish I could do something like that rather than, build missiles and stuff. And so I decided to learn iPhone development and actually created my first app. When was it? 2009, I think. I created my first app. And eventually, back in those days, you could just put an app on the App Store and would make a lot of money. Like, it's kind of crazy to think about. But I remember there was this fart app that made like $1 million. And I was just like, whoa, that's so crazy. So I put my app on the App Store and it just started to take off. It was a fantasy football app. And eventually, a few years later, it got acquired by Yahoo and eventually became the Yahoo Fantasy Sports app. So I was at Yahoo for a few years. And then afterwards, started to do a string of different startups with the same founder. So one of the things that I think is really important in entrepreneurship and startups is who you work with. So I've actually been working with the same founding team for the last 10 years. And so we've done a bunch of failed startups. And hopefully Welcome will be a little bit more successful than one of the ones that we've done so far. But right now, I'm the president and co-founder of Welcome. We are a virtual events platform. So in some ways, we're a competitor to Zoom and what you guys are on right now. So hopefully next time I come back, Berkeley can use Welcome. We're actually talking with Berkeley right now. So that's a little bit about my story. I don't really have a product background. I graduated EECS, Electrical Engineering, Computer Science. And I spent most of my career as an engineer and then an engineering leader. And now I'm actually running sales for Welcome. So it's a little bit of a winding road, but that's my story. I'll go ahead and pass it over to Clement.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. So again, I'm Clement. I graduated from Cal 2014 with a double major in molecular and cell biology, as well as business administration. And so kind of back in those days, I actually didn't really know that I wanted to be a product manager. Really, I was just trying to better understand what is it that I could do with this set of soft skills and hard skills, right? Like as a biologist, like I think like a scientist, I want to be able to test hypotheses. I want to be able to see like what is true in the world. And on the flip side, like as a business administration major, I really want to work with people, right? I really want to see businesses grow. I really want to see customers have their pains solved. And so I first got started as a management consultant. Really the thinking there was, hey, if I get to look across all of these different industries and get to see the problems that executives are facing every day for these, Fortune 500 companies like McDonald's, Starbucks, et cetera, I'm going to be able to learn a lot more about what are the problems that I'm best suited to go tackle and potentially jump into industry, kind of being acquired by one of my clients. And that was the thought. That's not actually what wound up happening. And so the thing is, in terms of the way that we delivered our management consulting, it was actually pretty novel. We have our own proprietary analytics platform where basically customers upload all of their transaction data. So for example, cash registers, all of those transactions. And then basically we have this analytics that basically does this test and learn kind of functionality where you can run an A/B test to say, oh, well, if you change the menu, how does that change the performance of your stores, right? Like if you change the opening hours, if you open a new restaurant, how does that cannibalize things, right? And so basically doing all of this, software on top of, how do I phrase this? We were basically teaching our clients how to use this software and also using the software ourselves to go do all of these analyses on, hey, McDonald's, what store should you open? How should you change your hours? For whatever retailers, how might you change like the layouts of your grocery stores? And the reason why I mention that is because that's how I started falling into product on accident. Basically, as a management consultant, one of the things that I hated was that I was on the phone every day for 3 to 4 hours a day, talking to people about, no, that's not how you run the analysis. No, this is not what this error means. Because the thing is, the analytics platform was built by PhD statisticians, as it should be. But the thing is, the end users were all marketing analysts. And so they're not people who understand stats at a very rigorous level, right? And so I think one of the things that came up is just, we were spending so much time on the phones as consultants just being tech support when we could have given them a better user experience and really enable them to go run off on their own so we can deliver higher value as consultants. And so from there, I accidentally became a user researcher where basically I was gathering all of this feedback from all of my clients on the phones and surfacing that to my product team, the people who were building the software, so that we could talk through, well, what is this user's mental model? What is it that they're trying to do? Why are they stuck? Why are they calling us? And using that to build this next generation of functionality that's a lot more usable. From there, basically, I was poached by a real estate brokerage that had really enjoyed learning about, Clement really understands reaching out to users. We want to try to break into this new market, right? Where basically in real estate, it's really easy to know when someone wants to buy a home. They schedule an open house, right? And so then from there, you can pair them with a real estate agent. But there's a different question of what if someone wants to sell their home? When should you provide them a real estate agent? That's really hard. And so they wanted me to basically go do this user research to go find who are home sellers, what is it that they're looking for, when do they want real estate agents, and can we build a business out of it? And so that's what I went and did a bunch of qualitative interviews, a bunch of quantitative survey analytics. And from there, basically almost moved into more of a consulting or strategy role where I was trying to convince my executives, hey, there's this customer segment that is really interested in doing this one particular thing that we don't do today and we can't do today. And we should do a startup in a startup so that we can actually go launch this business and serve all these people. And so that's what happened, basically moved over to the business strategy side, convinced people that we should go launch this business. We had a product manager at the time, and he said, you know what, I could be building products for this whole new business, but I have another business to maintain. I already got to build products for all of these guys, go find another product manager. And so my exec team said, okay, well, we could either go hire another product manager, but there's a risk because what if they don't understand our business? What if they don't understand our users? What if they're not a good cultural fit? Or we could take this user researcher who's not paid all that much and we can turn him into a product manager and have him try to do all of this stuff. And I was trying to convince my executives, you're making the wrong call. I don't know anything about engineering. I know nothing about design. I'm a biologist. You have no idea what you're doing. This is the wrong call. They convinced me and they said, okay, Clement, just sit down for a week with an engineer, sit down with a week for a designer and learn as much as you can about working with folks on the technical side. We promise you're going to be a fine product manager. So that's what I did. And so basically after 4 years, right, of just this really weird journey kind of throughout all of these different functions, I actually did finally become a product manager. where I was basically building products for this business. And within 6 months, we were able to grow our revenues for this new business to be larger than the existing business. And from there, basically, they asked me to take on all of our real estate agent facing products. From there, then I was captured by Blend, basically to be able to make the real estate industry, the real estate finance industry a lot better. Basically, we make mortgages a lot easier to do. We make, HELOCs, home equity loans, auto loans, personal loans, vehicle loans, all that stuff, way easier for both consumers to be able to make their way through an application, as well as lenders in terms of being able to work with their consumers to get that to fund, right? So instead of a mortgage needing to take 60 days to close, someone can now close that mortgage in 20 days. And so the reason why I'm sharing this like really long drawn out story, and I realize this is supposed to be a short intro, is just the path to product is not particularly straightforward. A lot of my peers kind of accidentally fell into product. And it certainly doesn't, whatever job you take as soon as you start out of college is not going to block you from getting into product, right? Like I went into management consulting and then went into user research and then did data analytics and then did business strategy, right? Like, and all of those things are totally fine because I was able to use those to basically work with customers, engineers, and business stakeholders to really figure out what is the product that we want to build to advance this business forward. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. Shwell, heads up, I think you're on mute.
Thanks for the heads up. I was just saying, thanks for sharing. I think it's true that when you're in undergrad, you tend to think that, professional paths can be very straightforward. You figure out what you want to do and then you go do it. And then you keep on progressing down this path when in fact, it takes you all sorts of unexpected places. And I know that both Jerry and Clement, you both did kind of a couple of different things before, falling into your current role. And Jerry, I wanted to ask you for a little bit more details about you kind of briefly talked about you had started and co-founded and run a couple of startups. It would be great if you can talk through that journey a little bit as well. I think the focus today is to talk about product, but also to talk about product market fit, which is extremely relevant for startups. So love to have you share a little bit more about your experience as well.
Yeah, happy to. So I think when I think about product market fit and all the different startups that I've started, the one variable that really contributed to when we had it versus when we didn't is when we built something that we ourselves wanted, right? So the very first startup, we were building a fantasy football app. Me and my friends, we all loved fantasy football because after we graduated from Cal, we would have a fantasy football league every year. We would have a fantasy basketball league every year. That's how me and my friends kept in touch. And so when I was building the fantasy football app, I would just go to my friends and, hey, try this out, right? And then they thought it was pretty lame, actually. They're like, why would you want to check your scores on your phone? Like, keep in mind, you guys are young, but like back in those days, phones were tiny, so it's just like, I can't even see my scores on this thing. But, we kept at it because we understood what the user wanted because we were the user. So Clement, you talked about real estate. I actually had a real estate startup. Like a few years ago, we were trying to create commercial real estate property management software. Now, I invested in commercial real estate, but I really didn't understand the nuances of the user, right? I was not a property manager. I was not an asset manager. I was just an investor. And my application was geared toward, the end user. You talk about the end user, right? The end user was the actual property manager. I had no experience there. So as a result, I could not learn as quickly because I had to get feedback from somebody else that really understood the space. Fast forward a little bit, right? So we got into Y Combinator. Shwell, I don't know if you know, but we actually got into Y Combinator with a completely different idea. My cousin, who also went to Berkeley, he was a co-founder and CEO of Caviar, which is one of the most well-known Berkeley-based startups. It actually started in Berkeley doing food delivery.
Yeah.
And so he actually funded us to essentially create Caviar 2.0, where we would sell to restaurants and then create an app to let them order ingredients from their wholesalers. So we did that for a little bit, but we didn't really understand wholesale food, right? None of us were really in the space. And so when COVID hit, of course, all the restaurants closed. And so we couldn't sell to our customers anymore. So as we kind of sat around, we're like, okay, what is something that we know, number one, and what is something that we think could benefit like could be a tailwind, right, for COVID. Now, my co-founder and I, we used to actually run in-person events. So after we got acquired by Yahoo, as you do, you kind of rest, invest, you get kind of bored, right? So we decided to create a meetup for other entrepreneurs that had gotten acquired and they were now in leadership positions. So we were in our mid-20s. We were promoted to like, you know, director level positions. We'd never managed a single person before. So we're like, these guys are crazy. Why would they do that? And so we got a group of other founders that felt the same way. It started off as a meetup, and then it became bigger and bigger because we realized there were a lot of people in that position. And eventually it became a full-blown conference. We would fly in speakers. You know, we had huge venues. We had a production team of 25 to 50, and we loved it. I mean, it was just a passion project of ours. And so when we're thinking about that experience and then going to all these virtual events, right, including a lot on Zoom, we're like, wow, virtual events kind of suck, right? So like we would never put any of our events on Zoom or like on any other platforms. So that really gave us an idea for Welcome. So Welcome in a nutshell is it's a high-end virtual event platform that allows you to throw events that feel like an Apple product launch, right? That's the level of production value. That's the level of quality that we go for. And so we launched about 2 months ago and instantly just exploded out the gate. Why? I mean, yes, we got lucky in a sense because of the timing and COVID and things like that. But the difference between building Welcome and almost every other startup that we've tried is that we knew exactly what to build because we were the end user.
I think that's perfect. Actually, in one of the previous semesters when Michael came in, he was also talking about how whether or not you know you have product market fit. And the easiest way is essentially whether or not you have too many users coming in that you are worried every day about not having the right resources to serve all the users that are coming in. And so I think that relates very well to what you're saying in terms of thinking about how you get there. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about how you decided to make the switch as well. It's obviously because you used to host in-person events, but there could also be, you know, a dozen other things that you could be building. So how did you choose this particular thing out of all the different other options that you had?
Well, I'll be honest, we didn't have a lot of options. So we had a few other ideas. They always ended up in dead ends, again, because we didn't have any expertise there. And virtual events was really something that we felt strongly was going to be big. And also, we felt like it was easy pickings, to be honest, because we saw what was out there. And we were like, I think we could do better. And in fact, I think we could do better in a really short amount of time. And we were just all excited about the idea. So my younger brother, so my dad's actually here. John Shen, he's actually my dad. I want to call him out. So my younger brother is actually a co-founder. He's actually 15 years younger than I am. So he's a lot younger. And he actually was helping us out back when we were doing these events too. I mean, he was really young, but he was helping us out. And so all three of us had experience in events. So we knew what it took. And I think when you know exactly what's missing, like when you see like the gap, so to speak, in the offensive line, right? Sorry, I'm a sports guy, so I like to use sports. When you see the gap in the defensive line, like you just go for it, right? And that was the only gap we saw. Every other opening closed on us. And so that was the only option that we saw was realistic.
By the way, when we were looking at YC Startups this batch, we were talking to other investors and they were like, oh yeah, did you guys know that two of the co-founders are brothers? I totally thought you guys were twins. I didn't know he's 15 years younger. Yeah.
Oh, why thank you, Shirley. That's so kind of you.
Clement, I also wanted to follow up and ask you about, especially because you're looking at real estate and kind of all of these more complex financial products. How do you think about product when you're working in a very different space, especially because Jerry is essentially focused on 2B, also delivering, obviously value to end users, but doing event production for larger organizations. How about from your perspective? What are you thinking about every day?
Yeah, for sure. Great question. And so I think first just want to hammer home on a point that it is significantly easier to build products when you yourself are the end user, right? And so the reason why I say that is because, I basically wear these two different hats. Like my full-time hat is product manager at Blend, but kind of my side hat is of course founder at, Product Manager HQ, which is basically a community of product managers kind of all around the world. And there, because I am a product manager, right? Like I can very clearly see there are gaps in terms of events or content or what have you. And so it's very clear to me, like, what is the next thing that I should be doing for product manager HQ, basically on the weekends, at nights, whatever. But in terms of actually attacking financial technology, right? Like in consumer finance, it is so much more difficult to be able to have a very kind of reasoned first principles perspective of what is the next thing that we should be doing. And I think the reason for that is because consumer finance is incredibly, incredibly complicated. Like there are so many different players in this space, all of whom have, you know, these interlocking interactions with one another. And on top of that, there's all these regulations on top of it, right? Like there are all these different governing bodies that say you have to do things in XYZ way. And you also have to worry about information security, which is all sorts of fun. And just on top of that, like when you're working with businesses, I think one of the things that people forget about when they are launching business to businesses, basically, is that you need to convince an entire business to adopt your product. And that means that they have to change the way that they work, right? And so as an example, when we're working with lenders like US Bank, Wells Fargo, what have you, they already have had processes in place for the last decade, 2 decades, 3 decades that have been profitable, that have made them market leaders. And so why should they give up all of the things that they were doing before to go try to adopt your new thing, right? And so in those spaces, it is actually really important to bring along your customer as a partner, right? So we're very good at understanding what user experiences should look like. We're really good at understanding, you know, how can we make a really delightful consumer experience? But when it comes all the way down to, okay, but what regulations do we need to watch out for? How are your current processes working in terms of who's intaking the loan, who's handing the loan off to someone else? What are all the different systems that are in play? We rely on our customers to be those thought partners alongside us. And so one of the things that we really want to focus on is we really want to co-develop with them, right? One of the things that is really crucial as you try to work towards getting your product to fit a market, right? I mean, the whole concept of product market fit is basically there exists some market out there in the world that would have existed with or without your product, right? Then you have some product, something that you've built. And the open question is, how well does your product actually lock into this market, right? And the way in which you actually get your product to meet that market very, very well is to, one, have a lot of agility, because if you can't make your product shift very quickly, it's not going to be able to evolve quickly to a market, right? But two is you need to know what market you're going after. You need to know what it is that the market needs. And so when your customers are sitting alongside you, co-developing for this, you know, enterprise SaaS software, basically, you know, how are we going to actually go create a loan out of nothing? How are we going to actually go work through the different scenarios on a loan, make a decision on a loan, figure out how to get a loan into all these different operating systems downstream? It's really crucial to bring customers in because now they're supplying that market side. And so long as you have sufficient agility to really work alongside customers to build that out, you can really go flesh out that product market fit right out the gate, right? Like basically the market is demanding what the product should look like, right? Like they're the ones who are telling you this is what fit looks like. And of course, from there, there's almost like a reverse problem of you don't want to become a custom dev shop, right? What I mean by that is you don't want them to be telling you all the shots of what it is that you should be building. You need to come in with, you know, pretty principled stances of, yes, I understand that your business used to work this way, but we see that the world is better in XYZ way. If you use data instead of docs, if you give the consumer more information instead of less, if you can pre-fill more information on their behalf. And so kind of, so long as we come to them with, this is our perspective on the world, but we're missing these pieces, tell us these other pieces, let's jointly solution it together. That almost automatically creates product market fit. At least back to the original question of what am I thinking about all day? I'm really thinking about 2 core pieces in terms of consumer finance on the lender's behalf, right? And so one of the things to think about for Blend specifically is that we're not even a business to business company. We're really a business to consumer company because our end product is this 2-sided platform where consumers apply for loans through usbank.com or wellsfargo.com or whatever, right? And so we serve that entire consumer side of the experience. We also have to serve the entire lender side of the experience of, okay, and now you have all these loans that you need to work on. You're sitting in there 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. How are you going to work on all of these loans, right? And so from that perspective, I need to wear 2 different hats of what am I worried about, right? And so from a lender's perspective, I'm worried about 2 things. One is how do I create more value for my consumers, whether that more value is shortening the amount of time it takes for them to be able to get the loan that they want, or whether it is enabling them to get more alongside the loan that they want, right? So as an example, if I was going to get a mortgage today, right, I could go get that mortgage and pay, let's say, 2.85, 2.875%, right? Or if I also open a deposit account, basically a checkings account or a savings account with that financial institution, and I put in 100K, they're going to give me an to 5% discount on my mortgage, right? And it's great for the financial institution to do that because they can then take these deposits that I put in and use that to lend out to other borrowers, right? So it's great for the financial institution to offer that discount. It's great for the consumer because then they can do more with the lender and get like these financial benefits, right? So as a lender, part one is how do I provide more value for the consumer? And part two is how do I cut my costs, right? Because at the end of the day, consumer finance just requires a lot of manpower, unfortunately, right? Like it's just so much paperwork and all of these different systems that don't necessarily talk to each other very well. And so as an example, when you're trying to go get a mortgage, or even if you're trying to get like an auto loan, right? Someone might tell you, hey, well, what I need is I'm going to need, 2 months of your, I'm going to need basically 2 months of your asset statements, right? Basically, I want to see that you have the money in your bank account to be able to make the down payment on your house, right? And one of the things that happens is consumers will then send them like 2 different months, like 2 non-continuous months of asset statements, right? Or they're only going to send them 4 out of 5 pages because the 5th page is blank. And then that means a lot of back and forth between the consumer and the loan officer, right? And that is all really painful. But what Blend can do is Blend can enable the borrower to log into their savings account online and be able to just automatically pipe that information over to the financial institution so that what used to take 2 weeks to coordinate now takes just as much time as it takes for the borrower to log in, right? And so as a lender, I care a lot about reducing the time that it takes to actually go create a loan and reducing all of this operational costs, right? From a consumer perspective, of course, what I really want to know is how can I get the lowest possible rates with the fastest possible time to close, because I have stuff that I want to do. I think one of the things that we need to really remember about consumers as borrowers is that no one wants to be a borrower, right? Like no one goes out there and says, darn, I really wish I could take an 800K loan, right? Like people say, I want to buy a house, right? Like I want to move my family here. I want to be able to have my kids attend this school district. I want to be able to grow my family. I want to be able to move in with a significant other or whatever, right? And so no one goes into it thinking, well, gee, I'd really love a loan. People are really going into it saying, I really want to get a house, right? And so how can we make it so that they can achieve all of these objectives without needing to worry so much about all of these background concerns, right? How do we make sure that they're always going to get the lowest possible rate and have that loan closed in the fastest possible time with the smoothest possible experience? So kind of those are the things that keep me up at night. There are multiple ways to attack that, whether that's from a consumer experience perspective, a lender experience perspective, or an integrations perspective. As an example, one of the things that you can do is you can basically, instead of having to send someone out to go look at a house, right? Looking at a house and, actually visit the house during COVID and say like, okay, I think this house is basically worth about 1.25 million based on, the roof and the exterior and the foundation or whatever, right? Like, why not just use data? Why not use all of the different property information that's kind of like that house? The same 3-bedroom, 2-bath in the same neighborhood with the same characteristics. What if we could just do that? That's called an automated valuation model, AVM. If we could hit that instead of asking the borrower to go schedule a time with an appraiser to go come out and then wear a mask and make sure that they don't get infected, right? Like instead of doing all of that, what if we just integrated to an AVM so that no one has to do any of these shenanigans, right? And so, but that's easier said than done. We can do the integration, but that the lender needs to accept that their risk policy that, I'm going to go fund this mortgage or this home equity loan or whatever is going to accept taking this AVM instead of taking this paper-based process of sending out a person to go look at a property. So kind of these are the types of things that I think about. And I wouldn't know to think about these things unless I talked to my customers and really understood, okay, well, how does your process work today? What are you really worried about, right? Like, what is it that you're trying to get done with your business? And how do we turn our software, our offering to enable you to be able to do all of that? So kind of that's how I think about, what are the things that, Blend can most offer in terms of driving that forward. And so again, kind of when you are serving yourself and, it's really easy to find product market fit because you're your own user, right? Kind of, whereas if you're trying to go after a market where like you are not the end user, it is really important for you to establish really deep partnerships with your customers because they're the ones who are going to best understand the pains that you need to solve on their behalf for them to decide to work with you.
I think we can tell that, Clement, you're obviously thinking about this all the time, and this is definitely what keeps you up at night. You're very detailed and thorough, and I think that's really helpful because for students that are hearing about this the very first time, I think it's important to understand that a lot of the things that they listen to sound really high level, and that's that. I think it's helpful for them to hear kind of on a detailed level what you're thinking through day to day as well. At the same time, in the interest of time, I want to make sure that we leave enough time for students to ask questions. So before we open up the floor to students asking questions, maybe I'll ask both of you to take a quick step back and, thinking back to when you first started your professional careers, some of the things that you wish you had known back then and what you would have done differently had you known it back then. Maybe we talk a little bit about that, as well as any advice that you might have for students in terms of thinking about professional choices. We can open up the floor to everyone else here to ask questions to you directly. So maybe, Jerry, we'll start with you.
Wow, that's a tough question. So what would I wish I did differently if I was like graduating Berkeley today?
Mm-hmm.
I think the biggest thing would be I think you'll like the show, to think like an investor, right? Because even as a young person entering the workforce, you got to think about your time is extremely limited, right? One of the most powerful speeches I ever heard was Steve Jobs. He spoke at the Stanford commencement, and he said, we're all short on time. Like, death comes for everyone. And I mean, that's not fun to think about, right? But at the same time, it's like, look, college is an amazing time. I had an amazing time at Berkeley. But I don't think I fully appreciated how quickly that goes by. I mean, I'm like, I don't know, how many years has it been since I graduated? Like 15 years, right? It just goes by in the blink of an eye. And you need to think about your career and your life really as like, you're making a time investment. You're putting time equity, you're putting sweat equity, right, into whatever it is that you're going to do. And the great thing about being young is you have boundless energy, and you have like, now I just don't have the energy that I did when I was younger, right? So sometimes I think I can do it, but my body just gives up on me. And so I wish I had 21-year-old energy doing this startup. I really do. Like, I almost thought, like, actually my co-founder Roberto's here as well. Like, we're old heads, right? We wish we were young spring chickens and we could just like, do all-nighters and do all that stuff, but we can't anymore. And so part of me wishes that I did startups earlier. I did startups earlier because startups, if you think about what a startup is, right? The risk reward profile, I think, is heavily favors young people because you don't have families, you don't have any obligations really, right? And so you are able to take those risks, those at-bats, right? You can go up and you can take swing after swing after swing, and you're young, you're resilient, you're able to bounce back and go again. And so I think if I were to travel back in time to, senior year Jerry, 2005, I would say, look at this as an investment and think twice before joining a, defense contractor with 150,000 people, right? And maybe there's a better use of your youth than to do that.
Thanks. I want to follow up on that, but hi, Roberto, if you want to say anything here, feel free to chime in as well. But I did want to follow up with your response, Jerry. One of the most common questions that I get from students, and we talked a little bit about this in our opening lecture for this class as well, is that I always get students asking, whether or not they should build a little bit more experience first or if they should jump straight in. And the issue oftentimes with jumping straight in is that a lot of students don't really know what to do. And as a result, get washed into, one of the few kind of most common career paths that people go into. And so I think it would be really interesting for you to talk a little bit about, the different things that you would have to balance, and what would be a good point to say, hey, this is the right time to start something, and this is the right idea, or this is the right team to do it with. That's
a really good question. So I think I should clarify. When I say I wish I did startups earlier, I don't mean start my own startup. I merely mean I think I should have joined a startup, because it's so different. Like startups, I think there's just way more opportunity, right? When it comes to your own career growth. Sure, there's a lot of risk, but to be honest, there's not that much risk, right? Like, I think the risk is heavily overblown. In terms of like what students should think about in terms of getting experience, I think experience is really, really important. So my dad, who's also here, he used to quote Shakespeare. He would say, "You're just what was it? Like, you're an unbruised youth with unstuffed brain." Right? Like, he would say that to me and my brothers all the time. You're an unbruised youth with unstuffed brain, which basically means we don't know what the hell we're talking about. We have no experience, right? And so I think that's partially true, but what I find is that in startups, that can be an asset sometimes. Sure, you don't know what you're doing, but you also don't know how hard it is, right? And so you'll try things that maybe other people haven't tried before. And I wouldn't discount the value of smart people that are a little bit naive, but are resilient and willing to take a chance. That being said, I do think experience helps in several ways. Number one is recruiting. So because I've been, in Silicon Valley for a while, I have a large network of amazing engineers, amazing product people, amazing salespeople that, and whenever I start a company, like, as long as I have the funding, they'll join, and that can't really be understated, because once you raise a lot of capital no longer becomes a constraint. It's all talent. And that's really, really hard for, I think, a young entrepreneur to really appreciate, because at that age, you don't even know what good talent is, right? You can't really spot it. And so I think I would say that's a big disadvantage if you're starting as a young person. But then again, like, there's a lot of resources out there. People grow, they learn quickly. Investors will teach you a lot of that stuff. So I would say the biggest thing between starting a startup as maybe fresh out of college versus a little bit older, where I am, is I definitely have less energy now, right? But I think I'm a little more measured. So I will, and Roberto too, right? We'll make less mistakes, I think, because we've seen a lot of different ways things could go bad. But at the same time, it is a little bit of a con as well, because I don't think we would take as big of risks as we might if we were younger. And sometimes the biggest risks have the biggest reward.
Absolutely. I'm glad that you clarified that, because even in kind of our opening lecture when we were talking about this, I think a lot of students think about entrepreneurship and think that it means that they start their own startup right away. And I think that's not necessarily the only path to success. And a lot of the learning actually also comes from joining another startup and figuring out when the right timing is that you really have a problem that you can build a great solution to, instead of jumping in with a solution and wanting to build it without first actually starting with the problem. So yes, I absolutely agree. And
we're hiring too, by the way. Just want to put that out there. We're hiring.
So for anyone who's interested, definitely reach out to Thomas and Summer, and I'm sure they can help coordinate. But I was about to say that really I used to, in my undergrad years, when I think back, I used to hear people say that, once they get to like 30s or late 20s or, even there, they just don't have as much energy. And I used to think, how could that be possible? And I think, obviously, Clement, I knew you from undergrad, so I'm sure you can attest to the fact that I'm always super energetic. After our startup got acqui-hired and I was with Goldman Sachs, one of our toughest weeks, I remember sleeping 4 hours over 7 days, and I was perfectly fine. It wasn't a big issue not sleeping for days, but definitely by the time you get to, upon 10 years into your career and longer, you really do start to reach a stage where you just don't have that much energy. So I really, really resonate with that. I think you really do need to value those very, young and energetic years to do a lot of stuff. Time is actually super valuable. So yes, resonate with that a lot. And I wanted to also turn to you, Clement, to talk a little bit about your thoughts. If you were to go back to undergrad, what would be some of the things that you would have done differently, or even just lessons that you knew you wish back then?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say that there are really kind of three that are top of mind in terms of the ones that I really wish that I'd done back when I was undergrad. And so first off, again, just doubling down on what both Shula and Jerry have said, learning is so, so, so important. And one of the things that you get to do while you're in school is you're not just learning, you're learning how to learn. And I think a lot of people don't realize that the more you can really actively think about, how am I learning about how I'm learning? How can I be even faster at learning? How can I master more subjects more quickly? That gives you so much mobility later in life, right? Because no matter what it is that you decide to do, whether you just decide to join a startup or start your own startup, the more quickly you can learn a totally new domain, right? Like that can be really, really valuable because that reduces the barrier of entry for you moving from any one industry to another, right? So as an example, right? Like you might be able to move from e-commerce all the way to, real estate, right? Like that might be really, really cool if you're able to learn really quickly, right? And on the flip side, it's not just domain knowledge, it's role knowledge, right? So I think one of the things that, I am, so in awe of for Jerry is that, he moved into tackling sales after a successful career in engineering, like through entrepreneurship, right? Like that is amazing. And it really attests to his ability to learn quickly and to be able to pivot and to really like dive in and to really consider that as like the next thing that he's going to be tackling, right? And so kind of by learning how to learn quickly and by continuously thinking about what are ways in which I could have learned more quickly the things I learned this week, what are ways in which I can get even more learnings more quickly, kind of those will all enable you to do a lot more with your time and open up your options, right? It really lets you attack any domain, any problem, and any role within those domains and problems that you want. And so I would really stress that, as a student, don't just be thinking about like, oh man, like I have to go study for this midterm. It's like, how can I study more effectively for this midterm? And then for the things I studied for this midterm, how could I apply that into the real world, right? Like, how can I kind of learn about learning so that I can learn really, really quickly, because that will pay you dividends for such a long time, right? I think one of the things that I haven't mentioned yet is like at Blend, like I'm currently on my 8th like product rotation. I've done a bunch of different product domains at Blend, mostly because I can learn really quickly. And so I've tackled home equity lines of credit. I've tackled mortgages. I've tackled this whole other business line called, wholesale lending. I'm currently tackling auto loans. I'm currently tackling credit cards. Before I was tackling like technical integrations with all these different systems. And like, that's mostly because I really had to learn how to learn quickly as a biologist, right? Because you have to study and memorize all of these cycles and all of these molecules, right? And so kind of, if you really focus right now as a student on how can I learn to learn as fast as I can, that will really, really help you. So that's really lesson 1. I think I did a decently good enough job of that, but I think I never really formalized it. And so that leads me to like my next 2 points. Is the other point is, I think I very much over-index on academic learning, right? And what I mean by that is I never really tested my hypotheses of what are the different careers that I might like? What are the different industries that I might like, right? And so one of the things that I had to go do basically is I had to become a management consultant to go look at all of these different industries and look across all these different roles, right? And it's like, if I had gone out and reached out to alumni, gone out and talked to my professors, right? Like people who have already been in industry, I could have tested those hypotheses. If I had done more internships while I was in college, if I had, taken, some semesters and like focused a lot more on tackling like jobs outside of my classes, I would have been able to learn so much more about all these different options available to me professionally, right? And so I think one of the things that, I really, really wish I'd done is I really wish I had underweighted my academics a little bit and really like more weighted my discovery in terms of what are the hypotheses that I want to test for my professional working life. Do I want to do entrepreneurship? Do I want to be doing biology? Do I want to be doing business? Do I want to be doing tech? What kinds of roles? What kinds of problems? Like all these things you can very easily get the answers to simply by finding an alumni like me or Jerry or Schwal and just like asking us like, what were your journeys like? What'd you like? What didn't you like? And you can kind of learn secondhand from us without having to go hit your head against the wall yourself, right? And like that is another way to go back to that first point of accelerating your speed of learning, right? Like that is really, really important. So like, please, please, please reach out to alumni. Like feel free to reach out to me whenever, because it is really important that you have that knowledge to be able to break down these hypotheses of what is it that I'm going to be uniquely suited to do. And that leads me to my third and final point, which is one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that, like Jerry mentioned, that you have to think like an investor, right? And I completely agree with that, but not just that, you have to think as a customer. What I mean by that? What I mean is a lot of the time, some of the things that we think is, we think about what do I want? I want to be a founder. I want to be a VP of something. I want to be able to make $1 million. I want to have this job title. I want to be in XYZ domain, right? But the thing is, that's not how value is created. The way that value is created in the world is when you identify that there is some customer that is struggling, that has pain. And when you see that pain and you can identify this is some sort of value that I can create for them. When you create value for them, that then enables you to be able to capture it, right? And so the way that I think about it is, no matter what job you take, you're all your own founders and you're all your own entrepreneurs. And what I mean by that is you're running the business of being you. You have a customer, which is whatever kind of hiring organization you have, right? My current customer right now is Blend, right? Blend is my customer. Blend has some set of pains that it has, right? Right now, what they really need is they really need someone who can really think through all of these, regulatory complexities and all of these business process complexities, and also understanding our current code base. How can we evolve it to do all of these new capabilities in this new paradigm, right? And that is an incredibly difficult problem to be solved, but because I know that that's Blend's problem, I can solve that problem really well as a product manager, right? And so what I mean by that is when you are looking for jobs, when you're looking to get employed by a startup, or when you are trying to create a startup, you always have to start all the way down from the basics. And this takes us back to product market fit. The market exists. There is a market, you have a customer, and they are in a lot of pain, right? But the question is, what's the pain, right? How am I going to go find that pain so then I can go iterate through how am I going to provide value to that pain, right? The thing that we have to all remember is businesses don't exist for the sake of being businesses. Businesses can only exist because customers are willing to give money to them in exchange for having their pains solved. And similarly, jobs don't exist for you to get employed. Jobs exist because businesses have pains. They don't know how to solve a thing with their current workforce. And so they need someone to step in to be able to take on all of these headaches and all of these pains, and they're willing to pay money for it. And that's what a job is, right? So we have to remember that we ourselves are products. We ourselves are solutions. And then we can't just solve problems out of thin air. We have to go understand what is the problem that we want to solve, right? So again, accelerate your speed of learning, go talk to other people, and really focus on what are the professional journey hypotheses that I want to test, so that you can go really understand what customer do I want to solve a pain for? What are the things that I'm really good at doing so that I can think like an investor, so I can think like a customer and really drive the highest value use of my time to learn and provide value in the world.
And speaking of talking to other people, this is the perfect time for you to ask questions to any of us directly, especially for Jerry and Clement. If you have any questions, definitely raise your hand, turn on your video, say hi, introduce yourself, and ask away. So Thomas, did you get any questions from your end in advance when anyone submitted questions? Or I know last time there was a bunch of questions that was submitted in chat.
Yeah, I haven't gotten any yet, but let me see.
Maybe everybody's playing Fortnite and they just have this background.
Someone raised her hand, I think. Feel free to ask questions.
So Jerry, what are some of your open positions available at Welcome?
Oh, I'm glad you asked, Shen. Well, so, I mean, we're hiring just about everything. Sure, you said, right? Or was it Clement? It's like when you have product market fit, just like you can't handle the demand. So we're hiring sales, we're hiring engineering. Man, what else are we hiring? Customer success, customer support. I think hiring is, I didn't appreciate how difficult it was until now, right? Because when I worked for companies before, it's like I had teams of people to do hiring for me. Now it's just like I have to source people on LinkedIn, on AngelList, on YC, work at a startup. Like people apply. Like I never saw this before, because before all the resumes that hit my desk were at least somewhat qualified. Now it's like I have plumbers applying for engineering jobs. I'm like, what's going on? Like, why would you do this? Right? So it's really, really difficult to hire the right people, to source the right talent. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to hire more from Berkeley because I'm a Cal grad myself. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, like the Stanford grads, they're cool and all, but Stanford is really, really easy. I have friends that go to Stanford, and it's like you can probably like sleep all class and still get like a B+. It's amazing. But like Cal, I remember like I don't know if it's still that way now, but it was cutthroat. I mean, CS61A was like 1,000 people. 61B was like 500, and then like 250. And by the time you graduated, there were like 3 people. It's like it's like freaking Hunger Games, you know. So I like Berkeley grads. I think that we are cut from a different cloth.
I agree. And actually, I wanted to follow up and ask, out of the positions that you are looking for students on, or just recruiting in general, what are some of the ways that students can start to think about it? Especially a bunch of students have never worked for a startup before. How's that like? What are you looking for specifically from students?
So I think most of our hires are more senior. But once we have like, the way I approach building teams is I think the initial team has to be senior, right? And then once the senior people are in place, they put together the infrastructure that allows them to coach and give like training wheels to more junior candidates. I can only speak for engineering, but if you let a bunch of like fresh college grads build welcome, like it would be a disaster, right? It would just be a complete disaster because they wouldn't think about testing, they wouldn't think about infrastructure, they wouldn't think about load. There's a million things that you would never think about without getting punched in the face repeatedly. And so as a student, you've never been punched in the face, so you wouldn't think about those things, right? And so what we try to do is we try to get a bunch of people that have been punched in the face so they know exactly what to build. And then once they have that infrastructure in place, then maybe in the summertime, something like that, right? Then we can bring on junior people that are hungry, they're smart, they're willing to be coached. I think that's a really important thing because, you know, when you're young, a lot of times you feel like you know it all, right? And in some ways, yeah, you are intellectually, you know, quicker maybe than somebody that like myself, right? I take a little while to get things sometimes, but wisdom comes from like being in certain situations and knowing how to react. That judgment is really important, right? And that judgment only comes from the mentorship of somebody that's a little bit older. So if I was joining a startup, I would probably, if I was in, you know, if I was back in 2005, I would probably join a startup with folks a little bit older, maybe 35, 36, I don't know, 37, something like that, right? A very diverse team that's working on something cool like virtual events. That would be a pretty cool startup to join, right? And I would want to join a startup where the leadership really cared about my own career development and coaching and feedback. So I think Clement made a really good point about how to learn, right? Learning how to learn is really important. I've actually been a little bit of a student of this recently, just a science of learning and the science of almost exponential growth in your own abilities. And there's a model called the Kolb's learning cycle. So how the Kolb's learning cycle works, that's KOLB, is you want to like learn a concept, and then you want to apply that concept, and then you want to get feedback, and then you want to immediately apply that feedback again. So it's a cycle, right? It's a cycle of learning conceptually, applying it concretely, and then giving yourself realistic feedback or having somebody else give you that feedback so you immediately know how to course correct. And in engineering, I didn't really know how to apply this that much. So I think my growth as an engineer was quite slow compared to my growth in sales. So I've only been doing sales for 2 months, but I really feel like because I've hired a sales coach and he's literally reviewing every single one of my sales right afterwards. And he's like, all right, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, this was great, but try this again. Now go back out there, right? And then, so I'm literally doing call, feedback, call, feedback, call, feedback. And the learning is just crazy. Like I can see my rate of improvement. I can give you a video of my first sales call versus sales call I did today, and it's like night and day, right? And so just that level of learning and being able to think about how to accelerate yourself exponentially is really, really important.
Definitely agree. I noticed that Joshua asked in the group, how big of a role does luck play when founding a startup? General question. So for both of you.
I would say like one of the things about product market fit is that there are really a couple of core pieces that you really want to be watching out for in terms of how you're going to really get a startup to, do really well. And, feel free to reach out to me. I have like links to these articles that you can read up on them as well. But basically, the core pieces that you really need to think about are like, the thing that matters the most is the market, right? And so kind of as Jerry's been mentioning, right, like right now, digital events are friggin' huge because like right now is the market for it. That's not to say that markets don't shift over time, right? Of course markets do, right? Like in terms of the, mobile apps market that has clearly shifted ever since, when you were born all the way until like now, right? Like it's been totally different, right? And so like markets aren't static, but a really, really amazing market is going to do a lot better than a great product that has no market or a great team that has no market, right? So like market is the most important thing, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily luck because it's your choice on what market you want to attack, right? So there's market, right? And then there is kind of the product, right? Or maybe even the problem, right? Like what problem are you trying to attack in this market? What is the way in which you want to build something for that? And so that's partially luck, but also partially your own assessment, right? It's partially your own taste of, and your own analytics of what is the thing that I think is really going to make this market actually want my product. And of course, you can have the greatest problem identified in a market, and you can have like the greatest like product idea for it, but you really need to have an amazing, amazing team to go execute against that, right? Because if you don't have a really good team to do that, then that'll mess you up, right? And so kind of to that, of course, yes, there is a luck component in terms of who are the people that you know right now, but that doesn't mean that you're locked out by luck, right? Because you can create your own luck, right? And so I think really the overriding statement here is like, luck plays a role in each of these three components of what market are you trying to attack? Like how good is that market? What problem have you selected? How did you know about that problem? Or like, did you have prior experience to that problem? And who are the people that you know and who are the people you're bringing on? But that doesn't mean that luck has to be the final determinant, right? Just because you know that luck is there and there is chance does not mean that you need to let luck control you. And so what that means is by knowing that you're trying to break down these three pieces of market, problem to attack, people to attack it with, like that can really help you start thinking more analytically of, okay, well, what are the ways in which I can maximize the chances that I find a really amazing market first and foremost, and then go find a really awesome problem to attack in that market so I can find the right people to go attack that problem for that market. Hopefully that makes sense.
And how about you, Jerry? What's your take on the role of luck?
It's a tough question. I used to play a lot of poker, right? And poker, a lot of people think is based on luck, which it is. There's a certain amount of luck, but it's also about knowing the value of your hand, right? The value of the potential cards still left in the deck. And most importantly, it's about reading other people. So I'll tell you guys a story. Okay, so when I was selling my company to Yahoo, I was actually a solo founder. So I was the only co-founder. Roberto, I don't know if he's still here. He's my co-founder then, but I pretty much started the company and then brought him on later. And so from an equity standpoint, it was just me, right? I was the only one in a lot of those negotiations. And so when I was negotiating with Yahoo, the guy that was across from me was a very typical, Bain, McKinsey, like vice president type. Like I could see him licking his lips as soon as he saw me. He's like, "Oh, I'm gonna eat this guy for lunch," right? And like he's a single founder. He doesn't have any investors. Like I'm gonna take him to the shed. And then so for me, I was just like a young impressionable engineer. Like I had no idea what I was doing. But I think the difference in that moment, right? So you can tell the odds were kind of stacked against me. I think the difference was, and I think I didn't appreciate it at the time, but for him, like whether or not he got the best deal in the transaction, it was just another transaction, right? It was just part of his job. For me, I knew that it was going to be a life-changing amount of money if I could win, right? If I could win this negotiation. And so what I did, right? And you could say, yeah, and maybe it's just luck. Maybe, there's a lot of lucky things that happened for me to get the outcome that I did. But I tried as much as possible. Like I had a 2-7, he probably had pocket aces, but I tried as much as possible to stack the chips in my favor. So the first thing I did was like, all right, well, where do I go to find out about negotiation? Lawyers, I think the lawyers know a lot about negotiation. And then so I quickly found out that you call up any lawyer, they'll give you an hour of free advice. So what I did was I literally called every lawyer in the Bay Area, that dealt with mergers and acquisitions, maybe like 40 of them, right? And so I got literally 40 hours of free legal advice. And by the end of it, these guys were like, wow, you know a lot about this stuff, right? Because I was like, the more I talked to lawyers, the more I understood. So I was just like, oh yeah. I started asking way more complicated questions. And then by the end of that, I felt a lot more prepared to go into this negotiation, right? And then so I distinctly remember walking into the room. This was like a final negotiation, and I had studied, right? I had talked to all the relevant people. And as I walked in, I could tell that he was nervous. It's like in poker, you just tell, right? Like he was sitting back. He seemed like he was relaxed, but I could tell that he was sweating. I'm like, bro, why are you sweating? Right? What's going on? And so at that point, because I played a lot of poker, I knew that his hand was not as strong as he was making it out to be. So I literally spent the next hour just like, I don't even really know how to describe it, but it was almost like, I think he expected me. I'm just an engineer, right? I'll just like fall over, but I just went like thermonuclear, right? I literally brought out everything I had learned in like the past week. And he was like, whoa, what are you talking about? And I distinctly remember how I ended that meeting. And I'm not proud of this moment, so don't do this. But at that time, the headline in the news was that Yahoo had acquired this company, right? It was started by like a 14-year-old. It was all over the news, TechCrunch and everything like that. And so I was kind of anchoring my price to what he got, because he's like this 14-year-old, right? He got acquired. And then I distinctly remember like we were literally like almost yelling at each other. We were like this close, right? And I mean, I don't think I had to do that. It's just like, that's how I thought negotiations were. It's like in the movies, you just like yell at each other. And then so I remember the very last thing that I did, I was like, okay, time's up. I said, and then he like made some point, I made some point, he made some point, I made some point, he made some point, I made some point. I don't even remember what was said, but the very last thing I said before I walked out the door was, and I was trying to anchor, remember, I'm trying to anchor the price of this 14-year-old kid. So I said, listen, at least I went through puberty. And then I just slammed the door and I walked out. That was the end of my negotiation with Yahoo. And then as I was walking out, I was like, oh boy, I don't really know if that worked. The next day, my valuation quadrupled, right? So you could say, hey, there's a lot of luck there. But number one, I think the lesson I want you guys to take from this is don't act like me. I was an ass, right? Don't act like me. But I was young. I didn't really know any better. But number one was you can stack the deck in your favor. And number two, whoever's willing to be bold, right? And to actually like put something on the table and act with conviction, they usually win. They usually end up on top, right? That's just what I've noticed. It's just like, if you've got to be willing to act like strongly and with conviction. The reason we picked our investors for our fundraising round, they were just the first to like actually put something on the table. Everybody was hemming and hawing. It's like, oh, I don't know, valuation. This guy just came in, bam, term sheet. We're like, all right, bro, I see you. You know what I mean? So I respect that. Like, I respect the fact that somebody can make a convicted decision. And I think that's a really, really powerful thing.
I think everyone is excited about that story. I see so many nods in the cameras. Let's see, we had another question. So one of the questions was, what did you major in, which you both briefly mentioned, but you can mention again. And how do you think your major has helped you shape your career where you are right now?
Sure, I'll go. So again, I double majored in business and biology, which is like an interesting combo. Although now, interestingly, we do have a business plus biology program at Berkeley. So I'm jealous, but oh well. Really, the way that I think about it is, it wasn't the knowledge in each major that was the most important thing for me. It was that meta learning that I got for each major that really mattered, right? It was the mindsets that I brought with me into my work that were the most important things, right? So if you said like, Clement, like recite to me Krebs cycle, photosynthesis, mitosis, whatever, I'd be like, I have no idea, right? Like, it's already been like 10 years since freshman year, right? And so I know nothing about biology anymore, but learning how to be a biologist was really crucial because it forced me to memorize things really quickly, to think in terms of systems, right? Like the thing is in biology, right? Like when a cell is like dividing or doing whatever, right? Like there are all these different processes that are all connected. I have to remember how turning this one knob changes this knob, which changes that knob. And the thing is, in business, it's exactly the same, right? Like when you change the way that one person does something, it completely alters the end outcome, right? So thinking in terms of systems was really important as a biologist. Thinking in terms of hypotheses to be proven or disproven through experiments, really important, right? Because the thing is, when you're going into, create a startup, when you're going into try to find product market fit, you have a lot of thoughts, but you really need to go try to figure out, okay, but what is actually out there? What is the actual market that I'm trying to go after? And what is the actual real problem that they have? Not my perception of their problem, but the actual problem in reality. And so thinking like a scientist is really important in terms of, okay, but what's the data? What's the evidence? How have I disproved all of these alternative potential explanations, right? So as a scientist, that was really, really important for me to have learned because of course, as a product manager, right, like I have to go look through all these analytics, but also all of this qualitative information of how people are using my software, my products, to think through, okay, they're doing this thing. Do they actually want to do this thing? Is this actually like explained by some other hypothesis, right? So thinking like a scientist, really, really important. And on the flip side, in terms of having that business major, I think that was really valuable in terms of me being able to learn soft skills, just in terms of being able to work with people. I think speaking back to Jerry's point, one of the things that I always thought in terms of negotiations was that you had to make the other person lose, right? I always thought it was a zero-sum game where like you both scream at each other and then the person who screams the loudest is the winner who gets the most money, right? Like that's what I thought. But one of the things that I learned in negotiations class is that that's not how the world works, right? Like the way that the world works is different people have different preferences, right? And so even if two people are looking at the same set of things that they're trying to negotiate in between, due to their inherent preferences, they will value some things more than others. And so you can actually expand the size of the pie. You can give each party something that they want, so long as they don't want the same thing with the same priority. And you can actually make everyone really happy through negotiations, right? And it's about doing that customer discovery of, okay, well, what does the other person really actually need and want and prioritize, right? And so I think from a business perspective, it really taught me about how to think about how do people organize together? How do people make decisions together? How do people like create value together? And so having that business component that made it a lot more straightforward for me to be able to speak to businesses about, okay, I see that one of the things that you're really worried about is turn times because that's messing with your OpEx, and because that messes with your OpEx, that messes with how good you look to investors or whatever, right? Like understanding that my customers themselves have investors and that they're worried about their investors, or that they themselves have employees and they're worried about making their employees happy, right? Like makes it much easier for me to have very productive conversations with them of, okay, well, I see that you're not adopting my product and I see that you're having struggles with it. Let's talk about the different ways in which it might not be satisfying your needs because I understand the way that your business runs, right? And so I think in terms of the two together, it really forced me to be able to do both hard skills and soft skills. And so one of the things that I really appreciate about product management, right, is that you are always working that fine line in between like working with like sales and marketing in terms of painting this really amazing vision, but also getting all the way into the technical nitty gritty of like, oh darn, like there is currently a production fire, like our product is no longer working right now because all of the code has like crapped itself, right? Like there's some bug in the code and we need to figure this out, right? There's a race condition, something's wrong. And being able to work through in a very measured way, okay, well, we have to roll out this hypothesis because that's not the way that this thing broke. Actually, the way that this thing broke was probably this. Can we prove this? And just like really trying to tease it all out. And so I'd say like one of the things that I would encourage is based on your current major, whether it is a soft skill based one or a hard skill based one, first identify the meta learning that you're gonna get from it, right? Like, is it gonna help me learn to be more structured? Is it going to help me learn to interact with people in a lot more empathetic of a way? And then the second piece is, okay, well, I'm going to have these skill sets for sure because this is my major, but what are the skill sets that I'm missing? And is it important for me to diversify into these skill sets, or is it okay for me to learn these things later, right? And so as an example, one of the things that I actively gave up on when I was studying at Cal is I actively gave up on computer science, right? And kind of the rationale there is, I can learn about computer science through like Hack Reactor or Code Academy. Of course, not like in a very like rigorous formal way, but like I can learn how to code in other ways, or I can write my own apps in other ways. But there's no way that I'm going to become a biological research scientist outside of school. There's just no way that I can self-teach myself that. And so I said, I have to learn this in school right now because there's no other way for me to get this information, right? And so kind of thinking about yourself in terms of a portfolio, what is it that I've got? What are the things that I'm missing out on? Is it okay that I'm missing out on these things, or should I go get those things right now? Like making those prioritization calls is really important as you think about, again, that meta learning of what is it that I'm learning about what I'm learning. So that's how I'd say like my two majors kind of really helped me think through my career.
And Jerry, how about yourself?
Sorry, what was the question?
The question was, what did you major in? Which you mentioned you were EECS, but how do you think your major has helped you shape your career to where you are right now? I think your story is also relevant given, you know, Clement obviously did bio, and then you did EECS, but then you're shifting into sales. So it almost feels like you both have done something quite technical and then shifted into something more business-like. But Jerry, what do you think about that?
Well, I'll be honest, I was never a very good engineer. I mean, I was like a meets expectations engineer, if you know what I mean.
Oh, come on.
So I was never really that good at it. I think I went into it because, you know, I mean, I like computers and stuff, and I like money. So it's like, oh, what major makes the most money? It's like EECS, done. I'm gonna do EECS, right? And so for me, I think what I really got out of doing EECS specifically is just resilience. Because I wasn't the best student. I was like an average student in EECS. But because of that, I was just like, oh shoot, like I better step my game up. Like I remember CS621B was really tough. Shen was in that class with me. I don't know if he still teaches there, but there's a guy named Hillfinger. Yes, Hillfinger?
Yeah, he's
Okay.
still there.
Oh man, that guy was a tough cookie, man. So I would just like dread going to 61B because I knew that it was on a curve and all this stuff, right? I barely passed that class. But I think from all that experience, like I knew, number one, like just kind of how to think critically a little bit better, how to solve problems. I think that's a big one, right? Like I think your framework for solving problems is actually really important. So now that I'm doing sales, and it's more than just sales, I'm basically in charge of go-to-market, right, for Welcome. So that's sales, that's marketing, that's customer success, that's customer support. It's something I've never done before, but I think because of my experience at Berkeley, it's like, oh, I can figure it out. This is just an engineering problem, right? There's inputs, there's outputs, there's variables, right? It's a little bit different than building a product, but I kind of approach it like building a product. Like when I hire people and they're like, hey, we have this problem and that problem, because of my EECS background, I can be like, well, how do we automate that? Like, how do we solve that in code? Can we write, you know, an application that interfaces with Salesforce and Marketo and our product to get the relevant data? It's like, oh, okay, we seem to be doing this quite often. Can we actually script this? Can we do all the billing in Stripe and actually get it into Salesforce and script it so we don't have to do it anymore, right? And the cool thing about that is like, it doesn't really require a brilliant engineer to do it. It just requires the ability to kind of think outside the box a little bit. Right. And when you talk about go to market, like we're a B2B SaaS company. And so every percentage point that we eke out in terms of efficiency, in terms of our metrics is huge. It could end up being billions of dollars in market value. Right. Whereas on the engineering side, it's a little bit tougher to really measure like, okay, yeah, we have a great code base. We have 100% code coverage, but like, what does that really mean for the business? Right. It's really hard to draw a straight line from A to B. And so even though I'm not doing engineering anymore, I think the lessons that I learned from problem solving and just like optimization is hugely applicable, I think, in any job.
I know we have one more question that's sent in group chat, but in our last few minutes, I thought it's actually quite a rare opportunity. We have both Shen and Roberto here. So it might be interesting to also get their perspectives, given that obviously running a startup is not a one-person job. There's a team and everyone collaborates and has obviously, you know, matching skills to put it together. Would love to have either of you chime in if you guys are open to talk a little bit about what's it like working with Jerry.
Sure, I can talk about that. So I've known Jerry since we were 14, actually. So I'm went to Berkeley with him, Berkeley EECS. So you know, And we worked together at Yahoo Fantasy Sports. Roberto was also there. And after that, I actually quit Jerry's, like he was my manager, and I quit and went to Databricks, which is also a very popular Berkeley startup, actually.
Reynolds also, yeah, from Cal.
Yeah. And then so working with Jerry, well, I think since we've known each other for such a long time, we kind of like, we try to ring each other in a bit, I think. So like, and yeah, and that, so I'm basically running engineering with Jerry's brother Tiger right now. Um, and then there's a lot of different things to do, pretty much. But yeah, so it's interesting, I think. And Jerry has been really into sales lately, so I actually fired him from engineering. Yeah, so that's I mean, any specific questions?
You're being too nice. You're being too nice. Jerry's a handful. I'm sorry to crash your party, guys. I've just been listening in, and glad you guys are having Jerry on. I call him a unicorn because he can just do a lot of things really well. I don't know if that's credit to Berkeley or to his father, but he's that kind of guy. So it's been fun. We've been working together for over 10 years. I think what I find interesting about finding somebody that you can work with, but also have fun with the entire time. The thing about Jerry and I, we happened to work together on a fantasy sports project, and that was fun. But after that, we still said, hey, we want to go build something else. And we had our series of failures and a couple successes in between. But we just knew that we just wanted to work together. And we said, look, whatever we do, let's
Uh-oh.
Roberto, I think you might be on mute
You're
again.
muted, Rob. You're muted.
Oh, okay. Did I cut off?
You cut off a little bit.
Oh, so you didn't hear the embarrassing part that I was talking
You
about?
can skip
Okay.
that. It's all good.
Okay, I'll skip that. I'll to say that it's been fun, but I think a lesson learned, since you guys sort of like talk about lesson learned here, is work with people that you enjoy working with. I think that's super important. And Jerry and I happen to mesh pretty well. We balance each other out pretty well. If you can see, Jerry has a contagious energy, and that's only magnified now because he's doing sales. But we have this whole philosophy. Jerry tends to put an exclamation mark on things, and I follow up and kind of like bump a question mark right next to the exclamation mark before we move forward. Right. So it's like, if you let Jerry go, he'll just run 100 miles an hour, which is really good, especially for startups. And I think that we've learned to balance each other out over the last 10 years working together.
Yeah, I'll follow that up with one more thing, Shwo, and it's that we talked about like whether to do a startup when you're young, when you're old. To me, the most valuable thing, and I mean, everybody says this, but it's the people that you do it with, right? I'm kind of old school. Like, I'm a very loyal guy. So like, if somebody's riding with me for a while, and I think Roberto's like this too, like we're ride or die. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't matter what company we're at. It doesn't matter what phase of our career we're in. Like, me and Roberto and Shen, like, we're tight. Like, we're going to be riding with each other, hopefully forever. Right. And I think that part of the issue that I see with people that are trying to climb their career is that they put their career over their relationships. But I think it's really important to make like solid relationships early on in your career. And, it's tough because sometimes you have to put the relationship ahead of business, right? And there's been times when Roberto's put our relationship ahead of his business interests. There's been times when I've put our relationship ahead of business interests. And I think at the end of the day, like, that type of bond is worth more than equity, right? It is, because startups are full of ups and downs. So if you can't find somebody that you absolutely trust and that you'll go to the ends of the earth with, it's really, really hard. I mean, I'm doing a startup with my best friends and my brother, right? And my dad, like, my dad's here too, right? So it's like, those bonds come ahead of any type of business relationship. And I think not everybody, thinks that's a good thing, like to mix business and relationships, but I personally think it's great. if your relationship is solid, I think it can really enhance the business.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. Like, so in our fundraising, actually, the two big firms that decided to give us term sheets were intros from my other friends from Berkeley. Like, my other best friend is also named Jerry. He was also Berkeley Eeks. So he's a VC now after many years, right? So then you never know. You just gotta keep your friendships kind of deep and long and keep on checking in, and you never know who will help you later.
I think it's great that Jerry, your dad, is here, and also Sienna and Roberto were able to chime in, because I think most of the time we hear from one person and kind of don't get that multifaceted view of what's it like to actually work with or work on a startup with an entire team with relationships built over a long time. Actually, in the first lecture, we were talking about how the average time it takes for a startup to be built to anything close to an exit is, on average, at least 10 years, which is longer than the average American marriage, unfortunately. So we were talking about how it's important to think carefully about who you work with, and it is exactly those long-term relationships built over time. So I think that's a great perspective for students online right now. I thank you, Clement, for answering Mahika's question on chat. I know we had one last hand raise. If we have time to take one last question before letting our panelists go, would it be okay if we do one last question?
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. We had a hand raise. Thomas, who was the hand raise?
I think, yeah, he just unmuted himself.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Milo. And I'm curious, how do you go from, building a product for yourself and your friends, like fantasy football, and then saying, oh, I want to make this bigger, find a product market fit for it?
So the question is like, how do you go from like doing fantasy football to something completely different?
Yeah, just something like, oh, this is what I want, to what I can do for other people.
I think, it's funny because when I look back at it, it's like this idea was really obvious because Roberto and I and Tiger have done events for a while, but we didn't really put it together. Like, I still remember, like, we were going through YC, right? And YC, if you don't have a good startup idea, it's really obvious because like you have these office hours every week and then like, or every 2 weeks, and then everybody's like has this like traction up and to the right. And then every week we're just coming in like the, students in the back of the class, not really saying anything, right? And so you're just like, okay, we are not doing well, guys. We are not doing well. And so we went to the drawing board over and over and over again, but we just never thought of this. I don't know why. We just never thought of it. The idea was right in front of our face. And now that, we're launched, I'm just like, this is the most fun I've ever had in my career. Because not only is our product like really cool, but our customers are amazing because our product positioning is we only focus on high-end events. So that means we have the biggest investors on our platform, right? That's kind of how we grew. We grew in the venture community because all these like really well-known investors were speaking on Welcome, and then they would get their firms to buy Welcome, and they would get their firms to buy Welcome. And so now it's just like, all these investors know about us, but then their portfolio companies know about us, right? So we have these big CEOs that come on our platform to speak. And then we have celebrities that come on our platform to speak. And so it's just kind of like, sometimes I'm just like watching these events. And it's almost like having backstage passes to every exclusive party in the world, because there's no real parties, right? So all the exclusive ones are on Welcome, right? So it's amazing. It's just like, wow, this is really cool. I never would have predicted that I would be going to all these exclusive events and they would be on my platform. And I never would have predicted that I could be using my platform to advance causes that I believe in. Like, we're hosting, Shro, you're probably going to be there. We're actually going to be hosting the All Raise conference, right? It's yeah. So it's not the morning session, that's Hop-In, but the evening session will be on Welcome. And it's the most, I think it's the largest organization of female VCs in the world, right? And we believe a lot in diversity and inclusion, and just being able to like not just say it, but have our platform. We donated our platform to advance that cause is really cool. And so being able to bring all of that together, not just your personal interests, but your values, your mission, all into your company, I think is an amazing thing. And that part, I think I kind of looked into because I didn't plan for it, right? It just kind of happened. And it's really amazing. I can't really describe how it happened.
And Clement, anything else you want to add there?
Sure, yeah.
Tackle so many different products, unless you have loans in all of these different categories.
No. So, speaking specifically to, currently, like, I'm currently building a product that's for me or for my friends, right? And I want to scale from this 0 to 1, right? Because I found a niche audience. It's me and my friends. I want to scale from 1 to N, right? Like, I want to be able to reach a larger market. One of the things that's very nice is that having a product even exist is itself a really great way to be able to get feedback, right? And so the thing is, once a product exists, people are going to engage with you, whether it is through like sending in like support tickets, whether it's just like talking with you for coffee chats, whether it's like during a demo at a booth, people are talking to you. All of that is really great feedback, but then it's on you to figure out like, how do I want to prioritize this feedback and identify, okay, well, there's all of these different pieces. Which one do I actually want to go tackle, right? And so to speak really explicitly, right? So I co-founded Product Manager HQ with Kevin Lee, right? And so basically the pain that we were trying to solve just for ourselves is we're currently product managers and we have no idea how to be product managers, right? Like we are completely new to this. We don't have like the greatest like mentorship in the world. Maybe we don't have the greatest access to resources. We don't know what the hell we're doing. And so let's go grab some other product managers and just throw them into a community, just throw them in Slack and like, let's talk. Like, let's just talk about what are the challenges that each of us are facing, right? And as this community was talking, right? Like as we were talking, we started to, riff off of each other, but we started noticing, well, we're not really like getting new insights in the community, right? Like we're all just here on our own, right? Like how can we bring in new ideas? And so based on the pains that we were seeing and hearing from the people who had joined, right? It's, oh, well, okay, one of the challenges is that we're not able to learn more than the information that's within our own heads. How can we get more information into this community, right? And so that's when we started the newsletter. And so we started the Product Manager HQ newsletter, which currently has 30K weekly subscribers, so that we can go look across the web and find what are the best product management resources, whether it's design, marketing, sales, engineering, what have you, and really condense it down so that like only the most crucial parts are surfaced to our communities that we can grow. And of course, once we built this out for a community, we noticed, okay, well, other people would benefit from a newsletter. So we opened it up for more people. And of course, we got feedback from our reader base of, okay, well, these articles resonate, these articles don't. And like, we had to go work through and prioritize that, right? And so that's partially like how we started moving from 0 to 1 to 1 to N, right? And then from there, we had the community, we had the newsletter feeding into us. But now one of the things that we started noticing is, well, we have all these insights that other people don't really know about. Like one of the things that's very difficult right now is there's a lot of business to consumer product management resources out there, but there's not a ton of business to business product manager resources out there, right? And so that was one of the pains that I identified as a B2B PM. And so I said, what if I wrote about my own experiences, right? So I started writing. And so I wrote like an article every single week, right? For like 52 weeks straight, including all the way through the holidays. And by doing so, people would reach out over email, over LinkedIn, over phone calls, over Facebook, and they'd say, Clement, this was such a great article, but like, why didn't you talk about this thing? Or like, Clement, could you talk about that other thing instead? And like that then gave me all these other alternatives, all these different avenues to go explore. And then through that, like kind of iterate through, okay, but what target segment do I want to go after? What is the thing that's going to yield the most value for the market that I want to go after, right? The thing is, you can't just chase everything that someone throws at you because there are so many different perspectives, right? So many different people have all these different wants and wishes from you. What you really want to focus on is the people who would be most disappointed if your product didn't exist, right? If your product stopped existing, they'd be so disappointed. You want to focus in on them and really understand, okay, what are the things that are really bothering them? Or what are the things that are really critical gaps for them? Because they're the ones who are going to be evangelizing your product to other people, which then enables you to get even more feedback from all of these new users who have just joined and use that as your engine, basically, to keep iterating your product so that you go from just an idea that I had to an idea that serves me and my friends, to an idea that serves me, my friends, and my community, to something that serves me, my friends, my community, and the broader business space within this market. Hopefully that makes sense.
Perfect. And I think that brings us to the perfect close, because I think as students are exploring, whether it's building their own product and solving their own problems to, growing beyond that, I think there'll be a lot of opportunities for them to work with, others at Cal, as well as even the broader Cal alumni community. So I think this is a really great way of at least bridging, alumni and experienced professionals with current students. So hopefully we've given you a little bit of new perspectives today, more food for thought. Thank you very much, Jerry and Clement, as well as Sin, Roberto, and Jerry's dad for joining us today. Really excited that we were able to spend this time together. Thomas, I will hand it over to you to close.
Yeah, with that, just thank you guys so much for coming in, and then it was very informative. And with that, I think that's it for today. Thank you guys again.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.